Jason, just a quick clarification. For people to hear us well through that, do we need to use our mics?
Yes, please, if you can use your mics.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Seems weird to have red for when you're ready to talk. I just wanted to clarify some things at the beginning of this meeting, some norms of behavior for board members as well as for any public that we have here. Some of our meetings have been very difficult. We touch on difficult topics that can become very emotional. And I think it's very important for all of us to be civil, courteous, and respectful, and ensure that all voices are heard. We do have some norms that have been in place for public comment, I just want to make sure that everybody understands those, and I will, repeat these at all our meetings. First of all, remember that we welcome public comment. We want to hear from that. During the meeting, agenda items that are action items are the items that the public can comment on. If it's information only, they can wait till the conclusion, till the end of the meeting. Address the board members. The public should address the board members, not other members of the public. Okay. They should be comments and not questions. The board should not be engaging in dialogue with the public at this time. We have a 3-minute limit for public comment, and we will have a timer up on the screen, backed up by Master Timer Jack. We're doing that to be respectful to everybody's time. Okay. And there is no sharing of minutes. You get 3 minutes. You don't get to split it up. I expect civil comments. Anybody who makes, threats, intimidating comments will be called out of order, and I'll only do it once, and then I will ask that you leave. I encourage the public to contact board members outside of this meeting. You don't always have to come to these meetings. We have emails. It's a great way to contact us. Okay, I think we can be better prepared to solve issues, direct your concerns to where they should be if we know them ahead of time. Okay, so those are norms of behavior, and I will, again, remind everybody of those at every meeting. So there is public comment during the agenda items, the action items only, and then at the conclusion of our meeting, we have public comment. Okay, on items that are not on the agenda. Make sense? Okay, so work study topic. Looks like we've got Callie. ESER 2.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you. We have prepared a PowerPoint presentation to give you some information about ESER 2. And the reason we are in front of the board this evening is because the ESER 2 budget needs to be submitted to OPI before the end of the month. I have presented the information to the Finance Committee on Friday, and now we are in front of the full board with the intent of receiving your feedback and having a discussion, anything that comes to mind about what you're saying. So what we're going to do in the presentation this evening is review some background information about ESER 2. We'll take a look at the timeline that we've used, the intent of ESER 2, what our planning process was. We have a chart that shows all the allocations that we have been receiving and the detailed budget for ESER 2, and then finally we have some allocations. We've divided that ESER two base budget up into, and just wanted to share that with you. But again, our intent this evening is to get your feedback on what you see this evening so that we can modify the budget and get it submitted to OPI in a timely manner. So let's take a look at the ESER two background. In simple terms, these were funds authorized by Congress to address past, ongoing, and future impacts of COVID. Our timeline, 99% of this timeline has been dictated either by the federal government or OPI, and we needed to update our policies. Michael worked on a safe return to in-person instruction and continuity of services plan. That was required. It's required to make sure that we have engaged our stakeholders and shared this information with them. And once we get the budget approved by OPI, it's going to be put on our website so that anyone that can have 24/7 access to the budget. And then the final thing is just to make sure that we have it submitted to OPI before the end of the month. As far as the intent of ESER two, what I'd like to point out in this slide is that it had a wide range of intent, all the way from prevent, prepare, respond to COVID, where school leaders could use resources to address the needs of their schools, purchase technology, improve indoor air quality. I mean, it is a wide range of intent for that budget. And you're going to see this reflected in the line item on the actual base budget. Our planning process is collaborative in nature. The 3 green checks that you see, those are done, and that's why the verb is in past tense. The yellow one is where we are now. So getting that stakeholder feedback, we've visited with the building administration, we've gone to the finance committee, and now this evening. And then the red ones are, that's future. So we will make sure, based on the feedback, that our plan is ready to go. We are using our zero-based budgeting philosophy that we've been using the last 4 years to develop this budget. And then we'll submit it for approval, and then Gwen will monitor the use of those funds over time. This is a very similar process that we use with all our budgets that go into e-grants. Let's take a look at the big chart of all our money that we've received. And what happens in this column is it shows the timeline when the funds are released and when they have to be spent by. Then it also shows the allocations on the elementary side, the high school side, and then the grand total. The discussion this evening really zeroes in right here where this arrow is, and specifically the base amounts, and I'm going to break those down for you, and the supplemental, which is actually added into that base amount. ESER 1, we have to have pretty much spent by September 30th, 2022, ESER 2, September 30th, 2023, and ESER 3, September 30th, 2024. And Gwen, when she is going over her budgets for next year, she is going to address this staggered approach on ESER 1, ESER 2, and ESER 3, and how we can possibly really squeeze every single dime using a pretty staggered approach on those budget amounts. So here is the red areas broken down into a detailed budget. And OPI and the federal government has said, here are your categories: technology, dedicated learning, learning loss, et cetera, et cetera. And there's also a category that they refer to as indirect costs. Now, it's a fancy phrase for that's the money that's set aside to manage this particular fund. And we don't have a choice on that. It's an automatic calculation in e-grants. In this particular budget, ESSER 2, they put some stipulations. One was in the technology area, that we must spend over 5% of the funds in technology. The learning loss, we have tagged, we kind of put a little comment here, it must be over 20%. That isn't technically true for ESSER 2, but it is technically true for ESSER 3, but we're way over that anyway. But we just put it in there to remind ourselves that there's going to be a stipulation of how much money you have to spend on learning loss. What we have done is that shows that information in a pie graph. And what we are pretty happy about is if you were to really analyze where the percents have gone, this learning loss, which is the big piece of the pie, is actually direct services to students, and that's pretty exciting. When we took the training for ESSER 2, and we've taken multiple trainings, one of the items that became very clear with OPI is if you're going to submit a line item in ESSER 2 and expect us to approve it, it had better be tied back to preventing, preparing, or responding to COVID. We are going to zero right in on that. And if you can't prove your case that it ties into that, you have a slim chance of us approving it, OPI approving it. And the more we thought about it when we were working on this budget, it's like, well, why don't we get ahead of this? Why don't we, when we design this budget, have a column that declares this is the prevent, or this is the prepare, or this is the respond? And when we fill out the ESSER 2 budget in e-grants, that's the first word that's going to be there. We'll put prevent, purchase library books and classroom novels. Prevent, hire additional staff. So that jumps right out on the paper. Gwen took our draft of our proposed budget and she sent it to OPI with that approach on it. And he said, fine, looks great. Put it in. So we got a preliminary thumbs up on inputting this into OPI. The other piece that we had some questions on if it went in, where some of the items fit, if it fit under technology or if it fit in another category. And it's much easier to have that sorted out ahead of time before you start filling out the grants form. So he seemed to be fine with how we had it arranged. So anyway, under the prevent column, those are the items. And I, just for sake, so you could, some of the words would just jump out, you didn't have to read the whole thing. It really has to do with preventing the spread of COVID and HVAC filters, cleaning supplies, et cetera, and that. And that happens to be a pretty small category. On the prepare column, that's, if you look at some of the reasons here, we allow for remote education access, gather data to determine individual student learning loss, et cetera, on that. So we did a lot of purchases to prepare for remote instruction or figure out the whole learning loss piece. That second to the bottom bullet is a part of my salary because of my direct supervision with the remote instruction that we had this past year. The final category has to do with the respond, and that happens to be the largest one of the three. And if you look again at that, a lot of this is to respond to remote education, respond to potential learning loss with our students.
Kelly,
Yes,
on that previous slide, how do the calculators, I mean, how are you justifying that? Line 2,
because we had students
because it's
that
remote
were
education.
in remote education that didn't have calculators at home.
Okay.
And so we needed those students to check out calculators so that they would be able to do their work at home with a good calculator.
Thanks.
Oh, yes, Ursula?
Just because it had been mentioned, we have rooms for some, like when it says retain staffing of classrooms. Will we have more classrooms next year than we had, like not this last year that we did, but the year before?
I met with the elementary principals this morning, and we have one open classroom right now. If we needed to add another classroom,
Okay.
we have one
One in the whole district.
at the elementary level.
Okay.
And we are trying to keep our classroom sizes as low as possible.
And what is that number about?
Well, it depends on the grade level, and so we first and foremost, we want to make sure that we meet the OPI standards for class size, but above that, we truly want to keep them as low as possible.
I know that was one of the things teachers had said was so great about.
And right
One of the few
now,
great things.
Ursula, we are really full in kindergarten, first and second grade, and not as full. We have plenty of seats in grades 3, 4, and 5 for some reason. I have no idea why, but the early grades are full.
Okay, thank you.
Our summer school program, we have almost twice the number of kids right now in our summer school program than we normally do. And if you remember, you approved a month or so ago to add additional staff to the summer school program, and I thank you for doing that, because we would be in a real pickle if we hadn't added that staff. And we have 11 teachers, certified teachers, supporting summer school right now, and it's quite a busy place. And the last one, again, has to do a lot with curriculum, software that will support remote education. We've lost some books to remote instruction that never made it back. Gwen, do you want to comment on the response that high school activities had on the negative impact of COVID? Would you like to share your thoughts on that?
Sure. So last year, because we didn't have people attending the sports activities, and really we didn't charge for entrance either. And so typically, there are 3 sources of revenue that we use to fund some of the student activity expenditures. And so it's ticket sales at the door, pay to play or participation fee, and our student store. And between those 3, we raise about $100,000 a year. And so we raise that revenue this year and we spend it next year so that we know we have it. We're not spending it on the fly. And it is used for motel expenses for teams when they travel, and for the supplies that they need, whether it's balls or score books or whatever that might be. And so last year, because we didn't raise that revenue, we don't have anything to fund those costs for this year. And so what we'll do is this year, we will fund it out of ESSER dollars, and then we'll have this year to, sell tickets and have our student store open and, collect participation fees. And then we'll be ready, you know, back in our cycle for what we earn this next year can be used the following year. And I did run that by both the OPI and our auditor. And where we can't just take the money out of ESSER and put it into student activities, we can move the expenditures to ESSER. And so that's what we'll be doing. And so that'll keep them whole.
Student store is like concessions, or is that a separate thing?
Well, it's separate. It's got a whole variety of things in the student store, whether it's apparel or, you know, all kinds of things.
Yeah.
Foam fingers.
What is it?
Foam fingers, you're number one.
Yeah, they did some pretty creative things there, but.
Okay.
I'm open for questions right now, but I am gonna skip back on, one thing that came up as a recommendation in the finance committee that we are going to do, and I actually put a little note here, and that our detailed budget for ESSER two, that is zero-based budget approach, it was gonna have another column added to it that shows reoccurring expenses. And we have not actually had time to sit down and do that, but that's on the to-do list. It will be done, might even get done this week, but if not, it'll be in short order. So that we know it's important to kind of have our heads wrapped around what's a one-time expense, one and done, or what's something that, that's been an ESSER two, and it's gonna need to roll over at some point. And we have referred to, we want to make sure that we aren't setting ourselves up to get to the cliff and have our toes hanging over the cliff. And an important part of that will be to have that column showing those reoccurring costs. Ursula?
What does zero-based budget mean?
That means that we don't clump things together. So for example, what you see on the page here, that's clumping things together. This is technology.
Okay.
And you have no
So it's
idea.
like line
I
items.
have no idea what is in that category. So when we zero-based, and I call it a modified zero-based budget, it's not, one that you would see in some businesses, because there's a little bit different, approach to that, but a modified zero-based budgeting, we literally have technology, and it's all, here's what it is. And when you look at the curriculum 19 tab, Ursula, that's a modified zero-based budget. You can see how much we paid for this book, how much we paid for that, professional development, and it's right down to the eyelash on things.
Kelly, don't we build those budgets every year from 0 to? It doesn't carry over from year to year in the same column, the same section?
We pretty much, start again,
Yeah.
so to speak, to see what our needs are.
And that's what it means with zero-based.
So we
like
just
it's
don't carry
only-
over from year to year,
No.
it starts at 0 and then we build it from there based on the needs.
Thank you, that's an excellent point.
Any other questions for Callie? Rebecca?
And this might be more of a comment, I like the, apparently like the finance committee, do believe that we need to be really clear on not getting in the habit of having a huge budget so that we're in trouble 3 years down the road when we have a smaller budget. So it's really important to me that we do spend this money on longer term things that we would be unable to do in other moments. Windows has always been my personal pet peeve, or pork, if you will. But just, I'm glad that you guys are overall making sure that we are not getting ourselves in a situation where we think we have an enormous yearly budget, and making sure we think about, what is this our one shot to get? You know, one-to-one technology was one of them. I, still hope we consider Windows being another one of those, so we're not paying to fix the stupid stuff every year.
Any other questions? Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
Oh. Remind me to turn on the microphone. Okay, next on the agenda is another information item, the preliminary budget review. Gwen?
I'm gonna irritate, is that okay?
When, if you do that,
It will cast over.
it will cast.
It's acting like it can't find,
Kelly, you got to stop casting.
will she have to?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Your
I-
preliminary budget, right, here isn't it?
Yeah, no, that's actually just the cover sheet. No, I always use my spreadsheet, and it's got numerous spreadsheets attached to it, and, but I think you can get the gist of it without seeing the document.
If you guys are okay with it, the recording won't show what she's gonna show. Is that okay?
But we'll be able to see it.
You'll see it, that our recording, and there's, I think,
Oh.
3 people online won't be able to see it. We'll be able to hear what she's saying.
Like, you back out of airtime.
Can we put the camera towards the screen?
That angle, we can try, yeah.
That would be something.
So Jason,
Go ahead and entertain. Go ahead and turn off your entertain, Kelly. You. This button? Yep.
it's not finding that.
Yep.
Okay.
10.
You want me to move it and you can see what it looks like to people, Jason, or?
So this first spreadsheet is for ESER two, and I'll share this with each of you, and we'll also place this on our website. But it's the details that we were talking about that actually, you know, it breaks down every single expenditure, how we're gonna use it, what, building is going to be spending it, and that sort of thing. So all the details, and I will share that with you first thing tomorrow morning, so that you can get in there and take a look at it if you would like. And, it will also be on the website. That's one of the requirements of the grant. So big picture, this is ESER two, so, the CRF money, we had to have spent by December, and we did that. And so then ESER one, we're just wrapping up the expenditures of that, through June 30th. And, so ESER two is what we plan to spend next year. And then the following 2 years, which we've kind of been back and forth on the date. In one place, it would tell us the final date was September of 2023. In another place, it would say 2024. And today we nailed down the fact that it really is 2024. So ESER three can carry us, is enough money to carry us for the following 2 years. And so we're gonna be fairly systematic about how we do it, because we don't wanna be all over the map, and, oh, are we spending ESER three or ESER two, or, and every one of them have their own set of codes and have their own reporting requirements. So we'll be fairly systematic about it. Next year, we'll be working on ESER two. There's a couple of exceptions, that we might dip into ESER three early, and Windows is one of those. And the other is that we're kind of in flux with the CSCT program, and the state, is wanting to see their match in a different way, and ESER dollars could be used for the match. And we've pretty much, allocated our ESER $2, and we would like to put that grant in the next couple of days. And the CSCT part of things, which is, social, emotional, health services provided to students, we don't know enough about what that's gonna look like, and we don't wanna hold up our ESER two, grant, while they work out the details on that. So, and we wanna get it in the next few days. So, if we scroll to the bottom of this, and we'll see that
you know, our ESSER $2, here was the allocation for this year, the 2.7 million on the elementary side, and on the high school side of 1.7, and we have allocated all of those funds, which is indicated by these zero balances. So then ESSER 3 is just below that, and our ESSER 3 allocation is 6 million, so almost double what our ESSER 2 is. And so we're thinking, and we'll make modifications as we work our way through this, but we can pretty much take ESSER 2 and lay it over top of ESSER 3 for a couple of years. And then, as I mentioned, Greg is working on some facility types of things. So it was interesting, we asked a question about windows, and the OPI was kind of lukewarm on it. And then when the documentation came out, windows and doors were actually in some of the recommended expenditures. So we're like, okay, that works for us. So we're working on that. I think Greg will have, he's working on some window bids right now. Initially, we had a difficult time getting anyone even interested, but it seems like he's generated some interest. So you'll be seeing those before we make those expenditures, or before we put them into these ESSER budgets. So again, I'll share this with you if you want to dive in and look at the details, and it'll be on the website for the public to look at as well. So we'll post that tomorrow, but we wanted to get kind of the general overview with all of you tonight before we post it. So then this is the line item expenditure budget, and I'm just going to walk you through it briefly, and then again, I will share the links with you. It's a huge document. It can't be just emailed to you. I'll send you a link. You can go there and open it up and look at it. And it's linked to numerous other spreadsheets, and they all have to be posted as well. So it's a little bit more of a process than just sharing it. So I would say that this is like a 3,000-foot view. This is pretty close to the, you know, all of the details. And in reality, in August, when we adopt the budget, you'll be adopting the revenue side of it. This is really the only time you'll see the expenditure side, and when I share it with you and you take a look at it. So your formal adoption is the revenue side, which I would say probably is more like a 30,000-foot view. So tonight we'll look at some of the details, and then when you have access to it, you can dive in there and actually really dig deep if you want to. So there's a tab for each department across the bottom. So this is the central administration tab. This is the superintendent's office. It's the board's budget is in the admin, on the admin tab, and the human resources. And these are grouped according to the coding that the state requires us to use. So that's why they're grouped the way they are. But then you see the business office, there's curriculum budget, there's the nurses budget, the technology budget, there's some technology in the general fund, and that's what we're looking at tonight, is just the general fund. So there are numerous other funds, right? Transportation, bus depreciation, retirement. We'll be looking at the revenue side of those in August. We do have one more board meeting and one more finance meeting before the final budget adoption. So based on feedback from you tonight, if you want more information, I'll make sure that we get that taken care of in July, or sharing it with you via email. But you'll have a look at all of these, so when we get to the final budget adoption in August, you pretty well know what you're going to see. We don't actually get our taxable values until late in July. So some of what you see in August is going to be last minute numbers, because it's just not available. I will get it out to you before the board meeting, though, so that you can look at it, and when you arrive there, if you have questions, we can take care of them then. So this is all the general fund, and these are all the various budgets that are funded in the general fund. And so my point on technology is there is some technology budget in the general fund. There's also a technology fund, right? So as we work across these tabs, you'll see all of the different departments, and then each of the schools. And you can dive in there and look at them individually. and special ed, and then it all culminates on this general fund tab that pulls it all together. So let me show you a little bit about what you'll see when you get in there. So every employee is represented on this spreadsheet. On the admin tab, you see the central administrators here, Micah, Kelly, Matt, the Beth, Jan, Sissy Klein is our ESEA coordinator. So all of the employees are on here, and their salaries are tied back to another spreadsheet that has all their salary schedules and so on. So it looks that information up and posts it in here. On this tab, you'll see an elementary and a high school. When you get to the elementary schools, you'll only see the elementary side of it. When you get to the high schools, you'll only see the high school side of it. So there's a lot of numbers on here, but if you take some time to read it, I think it'll be fairly easily read. So first of all the salaries are in there, and we're responsible for those at the district office. And all the benefits, work comp, health insurance, life insurance. And then there's what we call, I always refer to as the block grant. So the superintendent's office has a block grant in the amount of, it's teeny tiny, because they really don't need it.
Of not enough.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, I don't have the total on it. But typically, particularly in the buildings, their block grant is $110 per student, and so we take the counts from this year and allocate their block grants. And then they tell us, well, of my $25,000, I want to spend this much on printing and this much on field trips and this much. So they formulate their own building budget outside of salaries and benefits, right? And there's some of that here in the superintendent's office. We cover the dues, supplies, some mileage reimbursement, cell phone reimbursements, that sort of thing. And then we get into the Board of Trustees budget, and you're responsible to pay for the audit and some of the legal fees. The legal fees associated with human resources are actually shown in the human resources budget. There's some advertising money for any RFPs that we want to put out there. We pay for professional development. Itty bitty little tiny budget here. But seriously, if you're interested in attending the Montana School Board Association conferences and that sort of thing, we'll make sure that that's available for you.
Gwen,
Yes.
what does RFP stand for?
Request for proposals. So typically, whenever we, like for the windows, we would put out an RFP, and it needs to be placed in the newspaper X number of times with X number of days passing and all of that. So that advertising budget comes out of the board's budget, because the RFP is really from the district.
Right, now I get it.
Yeah.
So the other phrase you'll hear is an RFQ, but that's when you're requesting professional services. It's a different process than traditional vendor services.
Thank you.
Sure. And the cost of the election is by law coded to the board budget. And then the human resources budget. And again, you see the staff and the benefits first, and then midway through the budget, you will see the other, the various items that they need to keep their offices running. And then we pull it all together and carry it over to the summary page. So business office curriculum. So typically, and this has been the case for a number of years, this has not grown. The elementary curriculum budget, though there's a lot of detail in here, and Kelly isn't really done with her detail. We know that the allocation is $200,000 on the elementary side and $230,000 on the high school side. The elementary typically spends all of theirs, and on the high school side, because the adoption of curriculum is cyclical, we might not adopt any new curriculum this year, but next year we might have 3 curriculum areas that need adoption. So what we've been doing the last couple of years with that is if we don't spend the high school curriculum money, we transfer it into the interlocal agreement fund, and we earmark it for curriculum, so when we get to that year where we need 3 adoptions, we've got the funds sitting there. So, in the ESSER fund, you will see that we have moved all of the curriculum items out of the general fund and into the ESSER dollars. We're still keeping placeholders in the general fund because eventually those will have to return to the general fund, right? But we are going to be supplanting some general fund expenditures with ESSER dollars. And the idea behind that is if we don't spend the money in the general fund and we spend it in the ESSER fund instead, we can save those dollars in the general fund. At year end, we can legally transfer those into the interlocal agreement fund. And that's our plan for how we're going to avoid the cliff. And so we're going to look at a 4-year look tonight to see what that looks like, and it's not pretty, but you can see that we have ESSER dollars that are going to come in and support what we're doing over the next 4 years. And then we have another year, because we put the money in the interlocal agreement fund, the last year will be tapping the interlocal agreement fund to give us a year to respond to whatever the legislature decides to do, whether we have growth in our community or in our student numbers or not. So we're just kind of setting it up so that we've got a good look ahead and that we've got plenty of time to plan and do a good job of transitioning from having ESSER dollars to no longer having ESSER dollars. So the health services budget here is the nursing department, which is actually quite small, and they have a little bit of supply money, and that's about it. The technology you'll see many times on the elementary side. So here are all the technology salaries. We have not moved those out of the general fund. And then on the elementary side, you see a lot of the professional services and supplies and such are paid for out of the tech budget because we have a levy in the elementary tech, but we don't have a levy on the high school side. So you see those coming out of the general fund. And again, with ESSER dollars, we will be supplanting the high school technology side of things and saving what we have here in the general fund, because technology is definitely one of the allowable costs of ESSER. And actually, we beefed it up quite a bit because we're still working on that 1-to-1 ratio. There are probably some staff computers that could be updated and that sort of thing. So in the ESSER budget, you'll see quite a bit of money for technology equipment on the high school side. But the elementary has the technology levy, so we haven't made that move. So district-wide, there's a few things in here. Mostly, we budget for employees to move across the lanes in the teacher's salary schedule. So we don't know if they're going to move until October. So we're setting the budget in August. So I look at the history of what is needed for those lane movements and budget that and hope that we hit the mark, right? We also don't know who's going to retire next year. And the district makes a contribution to a match, really, to leave payouts in your year of retirement. The district matches that. You can put it into teachers' retirement and increase your monthly benefit. Again, we don't know how many retirements we'll have, so we look at history and say, okay, well, we usually spend about $500,000 a year on that. This year we didn't, which was kind of surprising. We had fewer retirements than we've had in a number of years. So, and then the same thing with our substitutes. We spend about $500,000 a year on substitutes. We did budget also in ESSER too for a few more dollars in the sub-budget because we're going to be using you're going to see tonight a request to use the sub-bonus system that was real successful for us last year. So we're funding some of that out of ESSER.
To do it again?
Yes, yeah, you'll see that on the agenda tonight. So anyway, these are estimates, and we usually land pretty close, like maybe we'll have more lane movements and fewer retirements, or maybe we'll have more retirements and fewer lanes. The other obligation that the district has is the health insurance benefit for retirees. So this has now sunset in their collective bargaining agreement. So only people hired before 1999 still have this option to stay on the district's health insurance with the district's premium contribution until age 65. Anyone can stay on our plan till age 65, but only the people in this certain circumstance, certain number of years of service and that sort of thing, can continue to get a district contribution. And so we have several people that have done that, and you can see here the dates when they'll turn 65, and we will no longer be budgeting for a district contribution to their retirement. So we have a fairly significant obligation there on an annual basis, roughly the $500,000. And then we have a few little tiny things in the district-wide. We carry some student travel abroad coverage, which of course we didn't need last year, but likely we'll need, going forward. All of the district postage is paid out of this budget because we don't want people not communicating with parents because they've used up their budget or they don't want to allocate money for postage. Now, we've used Bright Arrow and we've encouraged using Bright Arrow to send upgrades and communicate with parents, but still we don't want buildings to be worrying about their postage. Put your things in the mail, we'll get them where they need to go, that sort of thing. We do have some staff that travel between buildings, so let's say, for example, they teach at 2 different buildings. They travel between. We reimburse them for that travel. And we don't attach it to the building, we attach it here on a district-wide. We have a requirement to match some gifted and talented dollars, and that falls. So this is kind of a catch-all for little things that don't particularly belong in any certain place. And the maintenance budget is all of the maintenance staff, the custodial staff, and, the budget for all of the variety of things that they need to do, from pest control to elevator service to all of our utilities land in here. This is where our property liability insurance lands right here, to the tune of $360,000 a year, so big ticket item. We actually don't have the numbers for next year for our property liability insurance. I believe I should have those in the next couple of days. But we had a clause that said we would not be increased more than 8%, so I built it for the 8%. I'm pretty sure that's what we're going to see, right? The other thing that comes out of the operation and maintenance, so there's the grounds staff is in here as well, and then of course they need money for fertilizer and grass seeds and that sort of thing. And some equipment. We typically buy at least one piece of new equipment each year to make sure that our equipment is up to date and in good running order. And then all the custodians. But one of the things that comes out of the maintenance budget is that we have some loans that we took out from the Board of Investments to do some energy upgrades in our buildings. And so the idea being that when we update and decrease our energy use, we will have savings in the utilities budget. The utilities budget is in the maintenance budget. So we're using that savings to pay back the loan. These are low interest, and in some cases, no interest loans. These QZAT bonds are a federal bond with 0 interest. And then these other 2 loans were the two energy projects that we've done over the last 5 or 6 years, and we're repaying those. And they're mostly 15-year, so we've got a pretty good time left on those. So we have to make sure we budget to repay those on an annual basis. And always the big question in the maintenance budget is, what's our snow removal budget? And sometimes we need a big one, sometimes we need a smaller one, but this budget is large enough that it kind of ebbs and flows. If we don't need snow removal money, we can use that money for some other things that we want to do. And then the building budgets are identical from the perspective of how they're laid out. So the administrator is there, the office staff is there, classroom teachers, who's teaching and what grade. We have some vacancies that we have not filled, and I book the highest possible salary that they can come in at. And then as we hire people, I update this. And so this is kind of the worst case scenario. And as we hire and we know what we're actually gonna pay them, this might reduce this budget, right? So you see those, there's not a lot of those, we've done pretty well at filling the positions. So there's all of the different curriculum areas and grades, there's your counselors, your librarians, technology teachers, there's the paraprofessionals in the, this is Edgerton, then again, their benefits, health insurance, mostly life insurance, a little bit of work comp. And then here's their calculation for their block grant. And so Edgerton's block grant is $48,620. And then they tell me how they would like to have that distributed over all of these different line items. And I just finished up today reviewing, everyone has returned their budgets for next year. All the numbers are plugged in, so we're in good shape there. And then there are some district allocations in each of their budgets. So we give them an allocation for temporary workers. So each of the elementaries have $1,800 if they need to have someone come in while they're training. Well, typically you see it used in the library. So at the end of the year, they'll have to get some help shelving all the books and getting everything cleaned up to close up for the summer. But they have a variety of needs for temporary help. So that's a small allocation to kind of help them out a little bit. Some of the district obligations, we don't require them to take them out of their block grants. We give them a district allocation to cover their cell phone reimbursement and their travel allowances for the administrators. Their dues to belong to the school administrators and the elementary principals. We provide revenue for that, budget authority for that, so it doesn't have to come out of their block grants.
Gwen?
Yes.
On cell phones, do we encourage the use of the, district phone system, like, in their buildings, or do, just because that's listed on the website, if somebody's trying to contact a principal, so.
Their cell phone allowance, so they have a choice between having a district cell phone, which are not the fancy ones, trust me, and having their own personal cell phone, and we just reimburse part of the cost of that, right? So they will take calls from parents or from each other or on their personal cell phone. And most people opt for an allowance that helps cover the cost of their personal cell phone. So it really doesn't have anything to do with the use in the buildings. I mean, they can use their cell phones in the buildings, obviously. They can use them however they want. But typically the landlines are what, and the landlines are part of the utility bills that are paid out of maintenance.
So in what situation would a building-specific person, I mean, like, I understand why these three, you know, they're traveling from building to building, but a building-specific person, in what situation would they need to use not the school, not the building's landline, but a cell phone, or?
If a parent wanted to call them on an evening or a weekend, right?
We contact, administrators use their cell phones all the time if they're in a meeting and they're texting, if they need some information from a principal, and we're in a meeting, so, it's multi-use, but we certainly are not replacing our landlines with their cell phones at all.
Thank you.
Yeah. So also on each of these, you will see the special education programs or the extra programs that are operated out of those buildings. And, we need this data for a variety of reasons. Let's say, for example, a student from another district wants to attend Edgerton, and they're in a special education program. We charge them tuition for that. So I pull together all of the data so that I know what the cost is per pupil in that program. And if a parent contacts us and says, you know, this is what we'd like to do, for a variety of reasons, this was a better placement for my child than Kyla, for example, then we know exactly what that will cost. And oftentimes this is paid by their school district because they can't offer or don't offer what the child needs. So I pull those numbers together and they're by building. So you can look in here and say, okay, well, what does Edgerton have? And Edgerton, we're still redesigning their preschool program, so I don't have this all up to date. Sarah and I haven't touched bases on that yet. But for example, at Elrod, they have just their regular resource program for students. They don't have a specialty high needs special ed program at Elrod. But you can look and see what else is going on in their building at Hedges. They have a couple of life skills. At the high school, we have life skills. We have Aspire at Rankin, so you can see what that program looks like and what that program costs. So you've got a lot of information here. And then, of course, on every page, it lists who their custodian is, who's their food service. Even though custodians have their own budget, we list them so that if we're like, okay, who's the custodian at Edgerton, we can very quickly lay our hands on that information. So then you see the LEC has their own budget. Flathead High School, Glacier High School, those are sizable budgets, significant block grant budgets. So a couple of years ago, we basically made the decision that no elementary school's block grant would fall below $25,000. And so we have a couple of schools that they get to $25,000, even though their per student allocation would be less than that. But you can't really operate on much less than that. And $25,000 might be a little low, also, still. The Ag Ed program is in here. Their staffing, their office manager, they get a $6,000 block grant from Flathead High School and Glacier High School, keeping in mind, though, that they do have a Perkins grant and they have state CTE funding for some of their programs. Student activities, this budget is all of the stipends. You're going to see those tonight for approval, but you can see them all in here, what that looks like. And then toward the bottom here, I have the piece that is usually made up out of those three sources of revenue that I talked to you about that we don't have money for. Here's their motel budgets and their supply budgets that are typically paid for with those other revenue sources, not general fund. And then the special education budget is a significant budget because it has numerous revenue sources. There's a general fund special ed. There's funding in the tuition fund for special ed. There's federal funding. Idea B and Idea Preschool are federal special ed dollars. Sometimes we charge special ed tuition. Remember, I talked about that student that wants to attend and we charge them tuition. We can drop that money in Fund 15, but we have to spend it within the year. All other tuition goes back to the general fund, all regular tuition. We have a preschool program, and sometimes we would have accept other students into that preschool program, and they would pay a tuition fee there. So a little bit of money in this Bridges program, I think $51, so hopefully we'll spend that one of these days and stop keeping track of it. I just spent $51 talking to you about it there. So, and then there's some state funding for special ed, Medicaid. Remember, we get reimbursement if we're serving students who are Medicaid recipients, if we're providing nursing services or speech services or occupational therapy services. We get reimbursed from the Medicaid, the state Medicaid program for those services, and those then become available. Kalispell has historically made those dollars available for special ed because they are a reimbursement for a special ed service. It's not required, but that's what we've done, and it works. Because really, the only thing that we budget in the general fund and tuition for special ed are their salaries and their benefits. And then their block grants for everything else comes out of these Medicaid dollars. Then pre-employment transition funds, this is another program that is intended to transition students from high school into jobs and such after they graduate. And it's specifically for special ed students, so we have some funding in there. Special ed has some ESSER funds, and we're just wrapping up the spending of their ESSER 1 funds. They also have a little bit of ESSER 2 funds. You saw those, maybe it's about $79,000, right at $80,000. There are no special ed funds in ESSER 3, which I find interesting, but that doesn't mean that we can't use ESSER dollars for special ed. and likely will if we have a need. So anyway, that is an animal of its own, I'll just say, because it has a variety of revenue sources, and every one of those revenue sources have rules and regulations that go with them. So that's quite a process to manage that. So then I pull it all together here on the final page. So there are all the tabs that you saw. Here's the elementary portion, the high school portion. Oops, looks like I have a error of some sort at flathead, so my numbers are coming across. So I'll go back and figure out what that is. And maybe I have to do that right now, because otherwise my numbers won't work. Okay, bear with me for just a minute. It shouldn't take much to find it. Anybody want to volunteer to find it?
The blue.
Okay,
Is
right
it
there.
NA?
See this? Yeah, he doesn't like that. That is work comp fees. Okay, no, I have some other. That feeds off another number.
Is it being on that?
This one. Okay, I actually know what happened there, but 142 is not a, sorry, I was working on this before I came, and.
I saw that immediately.
Did you? Picked right up on that?
I'm not gonna say anything.
Pointed it out.
Okay, I'm still missing something though, Mark, so stay with me.
It's somewhere on that sheet.
It is. This sheet, are you sure it's this sheet?
No.
Waiting to see if she'll get it.
I mean.
One of these sheets, yeah. What the heck?
Thank you. You're welcome.
Must be a label in that column somewhere.
Yeah,
I
so
can
it'll show
sure,
up as a,
I can sure understand why that document is too big to email.
okay. Well, it is a new administrator's salary, and it is tied to another spreadsheet. So we're going, it's, Mark, you were wrong, it was not this spreadsheet. It only takes a minute, I know exactly where it's at.
It's a bad link.
There, look at that, shows it really, I don't know why that one keeps falling off my. Okay, so now we should be able to go to the general fund, and all our numbers are good. And so this is worst case scenario, bad news here. So this little section is the revenue side of the general fund. And there's a whole variety of revenue components. And some of you have, know what all of these are. If you've been on the board for quite some time, we've talked about what these are. It's probably time to do another update on school funding, because we have a lot of new board members. But this is what you're actually going to be approving in August. And so the various components say that our budget authority is 21 million on the elementary side and 22 million on the high school side. But our expenditure budget is 22 million. So this is the shortfall. And same on the high school side, this is our revenue and this is our expenditures. So we have a shortfall. Now, we're fine because we have ESSER dollars, right? So this is basically a little over $2 million shortfall. I guess the good news is basically all of the AA's are operating on deficits. So I don't feel quite as incompetent, but it is a concern, and it can't go long term, right? So we know that we have to, keep that in mind. So one of the things that you really need to do your soul searching on between now and August is what we're going to do with this elementary levy that we passed. It is not included in these revenue numbers yet, because we had the conversation about delaying that because of the ESSER funds, which makes all kinds of sense. However, if we were to levy it, it would reduce this shortfall by half. So, and that is a decision that the trustees will have to make. So, we could put it on the July, board meeting for conversation before we get to August, if you'd like, but, that is a decision, that can probably really only be made by all of you.
Mike, got a question?
Gwen, I should probably know this, but it just occurred to me, on the deficit, you know, when we talked about ESER two and there's some hiring of additional staff, like the middle school, math intervention specialist, is that included in the deficit?
No, all of those new things that we're doing, Micah, are not in the general fund. But all of the people who have normally been paid out of the general fund, for example, Callie's in here. And we know that we are going to pay some of her salary.
I was just thinking about when we make that column for recurring expenditures,
Mhm.
how are we going to get to what, you know, what that budget is that we built here versus that budget that we have with the ESER funds, and then what potentially is gonna go away? I'm just
Right.
trying to think through that a little bit, but.
So it's, in my mind, what I did with the ESER was I noted where we were supplanting. So that I'm like, okay, if I supplant at the end of the year, I'm gonna have $1 million left in the general fund. And that's what I'm gonna move into the interlocal agreement. So I sort of tagged it based on what we were supplanting. Supplanting may or may not be recurring.
Right.
So I think we'll massage that a little bit, and you'll probably see the supplanting, and then you'll see the recurring.
Okay.
And if it's already in the general fund, I don't think we have to tag it as recurring, because it's already in the general fund, and it hasn't been removed from the general fund, and it's going to be in our deficit, or in our budgets already. So we'll work on that a little bit, and what that might look like to make some sense out of it. But for example, the curriculum budget, we moved all of the curriculum budget into ESER. So 200,000 of the elementary is supplanting. On the high school side, 230 is supplanting, but we budgeted to spend more like 400,000. So some of it is supplanting, and some of it might be recurring.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll see what we can put together that will help with that. Nothing else really.
So when were we on?
Sure.
You mentioned that, this is money coming in. We talked earlier about how there's a growth of new houses, that the tax money from new buildings and new people moving in comes in twice a year, and we won't really know how much that has increased until November? Or do we have ideas of?
So we will get our taxable value numbers in late July, and that taxable value is the value of the property in Kalispell Elementary and Flathead High School, right? And so that's what we use to determine how many mills we're gonna levy to get the money that we need for next year's budget. And that's done each year. So the current value funds next year's budget. Just like our state revenues, it's based on this year's count, will fund next year. So we're always kind of a year, after the fact. So that growth will be measured annually. So if we have new homes the following year, then the taxable value will likely increase. But like, for example, on this budget, based on using last year's taxable value, because I don't have this year's, you see a mill reduction, and this is actually the taxable value through December. We use the taxable value in July, but they continue to update taxable value through December, and they provide that number to us. So this is a little bit updated, but not the most current. So as the value is added, we're really only still going to get X number of dollars, but we're going to share. More people are going to help to pay the X number of dollars. We don't get more money because there's more value. We share in the collection of that revenue, right?
There was one time, was it with technology, Jack, you were talking about when you were on the board, there was a time where the board decided to have either a levy or a bond that was, like it was thinking that there was going to be growth, like that is an option, we just never do it, is that right?
I was gonna, Gwen, I'll answer your question in a moment. Gwen, and I was gonna share what Gwen just said, and that is, new construction, new market value does not add more dollars. It shares the cost, so typically it reduces a taxpayer's, cost for the taxes. If your average property is greater than the average property in the county, then your taxes will go up. If your property is less than the average in the county, your taxes will go down as a result of it. So going back to what Ursula talked about, when you go out to the public, you can ask for either a dollar amount or a mill amount. If you ask for a mill amount, that dollar amount will change each year as the taxable value changes. But you may, once every 10 years, hit a year where the taxable value will go down, which means your revenue will go down. But typically, within a couple of years, it'll come back up again. So there is that anomaly that exists, whereas if you ask for a dollar amount, it stays fixed at that dollar amount for whatever the period of time is. It never adjusts for inflation, but if you ask for a mill amount, it at least adjusts for inflation, even though you could be subject to that occasional period of time where the taxable value will drop. Now, because we're on two-year cycles instead of the prior 6-year cycles, the likelihood of that occurring is considerably less than it was under the 6-year cycle, where the taxable value will go down in a subsequent year. It can still happen in the first year of another cycle, but any drop won't be as significant as it was when you were in the 6-year cycles. So going back to the elementary technology level,
Which is what's on the screen here.
that we started 8 years ago or so, it started out, it's a mill amount. It started out at 600,000. It's now generating 700,000.
707.
707,000.
But that's before we have the final taxable value, so it'll probably generate even more. But it's 11.31 mils, and that's the way we put it on the ballot. But you only have that flexibility in some funds. You don't have that flexibility in the general fund. In the general
Yeah.
fund, it's X number of dollars, and then, yeah.
So is that something, though, is that something that you would suggest with the way that the valley is growing, that we would want to consider if we ask for another technology levy? Would you want to do it, did we do this last one by dollars or mils?
By mils.
We did do it by mils.
Yeah,
Okay.
and we're currently collecting by mils.
Okay,
and-
and so
and
if the
it
high
works
school
for
one
us.
had passed, it would have been by mils as
Right.
well.
Yeah. The first year, we actually had a decline, but it wasn't by much. And then ever since then, we've been on the incline. So it definitely pays off to request the mills instead of dollars. And so we're 4 or 5 years out from needing to rerun that, but definitely on the high school side. And I believe you can do that same thing in the building reserve, but you can't do it in the general fund. So yeah, you're correct. We are currently doing that. Any other questions about the general fund? Jack, must you? I'm tired.
This is a general question
Okay.
about the spreadsheet. If you hadn't developed this spreadsheet 5 or 6 years ago, and expanded the detail from what we had previously done to this, how would you do the budgeting?
I would do a revenue budget and that'd be it. Oh, no, I'm just kidding. We had to get to this place. I mean, yeah, it was just a matter of time. And in the past year, when we upgraded our software, it has a budget component. But it is really, it doesn't have this kind of detail. It would be like the 50,000 foot view. So it would say, it's by budget code. So it would say, okay, the elementary teachers at Edgerton are $500,000. But you wouldn't know who the elementary teachers are at Edgerton, or, you know, that sort of detail. So our goal was to maybe not have this animal, but you know, we rely on it or I do, for a lot of things. I don't see us getting away from it. And obviously, this will be the first year. We will also use the budget piece of the software, because it will populate the software for all of those thousands of, expenditure codes. Where, over the last few years, we've literally sat there and keyed in all of those budget codes and all of the, dollar amounts. But by using the software, it will create that for us, and then it'll ship it into the current year's information. And then when we're running budget reports and stuff, all the data will be there, and we'll probably save hours. Because we would spread it out, everybody in central office would key in, whenever they had time. And then it would be like October, November before the numbers were even in there. We would put the most important, like the block grants in, so people had that data. But the salaries and benefits, it could be October, November before they actually landed in the software. So we will use that budgeting software. We're also using the personnel budgeting piece to issue our electronic contracts. So that is part of the big picture budget. It's got some limitations that we're kind of finding right now. If you worked for us before, we roll you into personnel budgeting, give you your new salary, it'll send out your electronic contract. But if you didn't work for us before, it's a bit of a challenge to get you in there. And so we're kind of finding that, but we're working on it, and we'll figure out a way to make it work. But,
Okay.
So we will use the pieces of software that we bought, and it'll be well used and create some efficiencies.
So Gwen, we will talk about this again at our July board meeting. The budget will be approved at the first board meeting in August, correct? Okay.
Yeah, so all of these other funds are on here as well. They're not as well developed right now. So probably that's what we'll hit in July, is all of the other funds. So that in August, you will have seen at least some of all of this. Because tonight we just looked at the general fund.
Great.
So my suggestion to everybody, even though it may be boring, is to look at the blue tab that's there on the bottom right, which is the general fund summary. Is that the general fund summary?
Yes.
Yeah, because that's the one that gives you the relativity across all 11 buildings and across all the different major areas. And if you wanted to look at something in particular, you could go to that tab, but I would just learn what that tab there is telling you. To me, that gives you the overview that you need. And then going back as far as we may be the only school district in the state of Montana that does something to this detail as far as the budget goes. For me, it's the taxpayers should appreciate something like that, that we understand what the expenditures are when we approve a revenue budget. Now, we may not understand all the individual aspects of it, because you've heard Callie use the phrase, there's 6,000 lines of information in there. And that's overwhelming by itself. But to help us understand from year to year, how much does it cost to operate a specific building? You can look back on those and see what it is. How much do we spend on personnel? You can look back and see how much that is. And there's other reports that summarize all that too, but from a trustee's point of view, where we're supposed to have a fiduciary responsibility to how the money is spent, we can never have the excuse that we don't know how the money's spent. The information's there for not only us, but for the individual taxpayers to see. And when you think that 90, I'm just gonna use a general number, 90% is for personnel, all of those, just about all of that 90% is contracts that we have to satisfy. So we have little to no flexibility in those. We have to honor those. And that's something that's difficult for a taxpayer to understand or appreciate, whatever phrase you want to use. Regardless of what the philosophy is, those are obligations that we have. So 10% of the budget, we may have some discretion in, but really not much of that either, because you've got utilities to pay. And you've got many other things that are standard in a household that has to be paid. So there's very little flexibility in it. And when you hear Callie talk about zero-based budgeting, this spreadsheet allows that zero-based budgeting. Without this kind of spreadsheet, and the details say, well, these are line items we have to consider. Well, some of them are just automatic that you have to consider. You don't have a lot of choice. But it just helps in understanding what's been spent in the years past, and, looks like we're gonna be spending a little bit more, 3% more, or whatever the increase happens to be, and this is how it's put in there.
So let's take a quick look at a 4-year, 4 years into the future here. So, this is next year, and these are our student counts, and we know our student count is down, but remember, the 3-year averaging mechanism has kept us from falling, completely to the bottom of, our student numbers. So, and here are our shortfalls, and I didn't update those, they were a little less. As I fine tune that general fund budget, that, and as we hire people, we know what they're gonna pay, that deficit should shrink. So, that was probably the worst case scenario that you saw.
Oh, you haven't linked this page to that spreadsheet?
I haven't. And I actually kind of need those numbers. So let me just quick do that.
Well, you need to hit the equal sign on the other one, and then click on that one.
I could do that. You're right. See if it's gonna work here. Look at that.
And you could do a copy and paste it and pull it over.
Hey,
Just give them the laptop, right?
yeah, I wasn't certain it was in the very next
What's that
cell,
supposed to be?
Jack, and it would only work if it's in the very end.
I can
Okay.
break out pies when he has to watch me do spreadsheets.
Okay, so just a little bit of information. This is our increase from the state legislature, 1.5% for 21-22. Then we're going to 2.57, so we'll see a little bit more revenue there. These are the budgets without a vote. So if we were to vote, so elementary here, high school here, here's 22-23, 23-24, 24-25. And, again, these are budgets without a vote, so we could vote. So these are the state funding increases based on this 2.57% increase. And then once they're estimating, the legislature is estimating 1.8 inflationary increases in 23-24 and 1.84 in 24-25. And so this is based on a 1% increase in our A and B, which we have like a 25-year history of 1% increase, year over year over year. But we know that we lost technically 75 A and B, so those students might return. So we might see more than a 1% growth, right? So this is probably the most conservative estimate. It's probably going to get better. This is probably the worst case scenario. It's probably only going to get better from here. But anyway, you can see that in this year, we're not going to get much out of the state revenues because 2 of our high years in that 3-year average are going to fall off, and we're going to be back to using the current year A and B. And I know that's probably way more than you need to know, but there is a reason for this look to it, that we're actually appear to be sliding backwards. And it all has to do with the A and B count and that 3-year averaging, and then all of a sudden we don't have anything to 3-year average with, right?
But we will have things, like next year, we'll have things by then.
Yes.
We just don't today.
With that 3 years is gonna be that 3 years. But next year, we don't have the opportunity to do those estimated increases, anticipated increases, or actual increases, but those will probably return down the road, and that might help us. There's like a million scenarios, okay? So this is kind of big picture, this is what we're looking at. So I plugged in salary increases at 2%, health insurance increases at 5%. We know that our utilities and our insurance and our audit costs are going to go up. So these, again, big picture, this is what this looks like. And so then we're always picking up the shortfall from the year before because there isn't any new revenue that's gonna fix that, right? So, the shortfall just begins to grow. We're at 2.1 million here, we're at 2.2 million here, but we have ESSER two, and then we have ESSER three, and now we know that we have ESSER three in year 3. So, then it grows to 3.6. These are the things that are concerning Jack in regard to these recurring costs and trying to, not to increase our deficit. But we also have the ability the potential for increased A and B. We have the ability to run a levy. So some of the conversation is, and actually this is all gonna push out another year because I think we can get ESSER three out in this year, then interlocal, and then a levy. But we might wanna think about doing small levies on the high school side over the next 3 or 4 years. And just start to build toward that 2 million, because we're probably not gonna get 2 million in one shot.
Wayne, what percentage are we on the high school side of budget?
I think we're like at 92, yeah, something first. So anyway, we're just sort of looking at, you know, where we're going. We need to keep this in mind as we move through the years to make sure that we don't create a huge shortfall that we can't manage. This number looks a little different if we plug in that elementary levy. And then that elementary, I'm assuming that we're talking about including the elementary levy in the following years. And so they do help on the elementary shortfalls, obviously. We might not have a lot of growth potential in the elementary though, so. And then, I had the state run some, I have a friend at the OPI, only friend.
Can you scroll back
One
up
friend.
on that, please?
Let me finish my story here.
Okay.
So he ran some numbers
We gotta hear
with
about
an increase 75, A and B. And the numbers look a lot better, right? And this is on the elementary side. Because the high school side, we didn't lose. So if we can regain those students, we'll be in a better place. I'm sorry, Jack. What would you like me to?
So scroll back up to there you go, in there. So the 22-23 elementary year is showing, I'll just say a $1 million deficit. But that's based on the $1.1 million deficit the prior year, not the 650 if you put in the board's
Exactly.
levy.
Yeah, so if we plugged in the 557, this
Right.
would drop by half,
Right.
right?
And I guess what even though I don't get to vote on this, you're still gonna hear my spiel. And that is, I would be inclined to not have the voted levy this year, but put it in the following year, because based on the deficit that exists right there, the deficit goes down in year 22-23, but then it goes up in 23-24 by $500,000. You can't tell that now because Gwen just updated it all.
Yeah, but I didn't go the right direction.
Oh, well then just take out the 557, because you have the answer down below anyways.
Yeah,
So we don't really need that. So if you look at 22-23, it's, I'll say, we'll call it $100,000 less. But in 23-24, it goes up by $500,000. So if you were to implement the levy in 22-23, then you're still at $1 million shortfall in 23-24. It just doesn't progress as rapidly. Now, again, if you were to implement the levy now, then 23-24 would only have a $500,000 shortfall. But we still have all this ESSER money that's coming available. But at some point in time down the road, there's going to have to be at the elementary level, whether it's 3 or 4 years down the road, another year or two after 24, 25, anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million budget cut if there isn't increased A and B or increased revenue from the state. We don't know the answer to that. So the biggest dilemma for the elementary trustees is, do you want to apply it now and really secure less economic impact later on? Or do you want to wait a year and know that there might be some economic impact, but you got multiple years to address it because of money put into the interlocal agreement, and then whatever the legislature does. Whereas on the high school level, each year, beginning next spring, we need to put in, like Gwen was saying, a small high school request because the deficit is more significant on the high school side than on the elementary side.
So I have two questions. One is for you. So with your opinion of potentially waiting for a year, do you really think that there is any way to communicate that to the community? Do
No.
you think? No. So it doesn't really, like, we won't get credit for it. No one will really know it. There's a chance that the county commissioners could up other things and it'll still be increased taxes. Like, nobody will really know.
Correct.
Okay. And then my question for you was, I know.
But we'll all know when our taxes go up.
Yeah, but their what I'm saying is their taxes
I
could
mean, we
go up
can
either way,
say, we can tell the
and-
people that we tried to honor postponing it for a year because we know we have some of this government money to help
whether they
to
listen
address
or hear
it.
that.
But they're not gonna really pay attention to it. They're gonna go, so what?
Yeah.
So it's not gonna register. So it's really just our own personal ideals as to what we wanna try and
But
do.
at some point, we have to find the money.
But at least it's a multiple year problem down the road. It's not gonna be an imminent one. And we know that we can address it in 25, 26 with interlocal agreement money. And again, at that point in time, the A and B might take care of it because of the increased populations. And yes, we're kicking it down the road, but we're not kicking it down the road 1 year or 2 years. We're kicking it down the road 4 years or 5 years. And so there's plenty of other elements that can come into play on that. And so part of me is just, I would go with the integrity side of it, which was our original thought, is let's get the money, let's get the approval, but let's try and see if we can get by without it.
Okay. So I actually have one. So question for Gwen, we're at 92% on the high school. How much, if we went, like, what is the full high school budget? Like, if we went up 6% or 8% to 100% or 98%, how much is
It's
that?
about $2 million.
So it gets us to kind of where we need to be now.
Well, closer. By
Not quite, though.
Yeah.
And then the last question is, as far as interlocal agreement money, there are some other really big things, though, that we're talking about needing money for, like maintenance and transportation buildings and
Windows,
well, I was going to say like ag property.
ag property.
I mean, these are like really big things that we're talking about doing. Doesn't that all is like tied to the interlocal agreement? I mean, I see that we have it there, but if we spend the interlocal agreement money on some of these other things, then that isn't there. Is that correct, or? is it
Well,
just
you mentioned transportation, and that's a separate fund, so that's not likely to come out of the interlocal agreement, and that'll be, what do I want to say, a couple $1 million?
Yeah.
There's
So
You're in the
no-
ballpark.
There's not enough money in the transportation.
And
budget
some of
for
the
it.
money in the interlocal agreement fund is transportation money, and
Oh, that
likely
was
it will
that-
need to be used.
That went in from prior years, yeah.
And in July, we'll know what we have to transfer in from this fiscal year, and then we'll revisit the interlocal and we'll earmark and say, okay, so if we put the ag land in there, if we put the, maybe we'll have some more numbers, and then we can look at what the balance, there's a healthy balance in there. I mean, technically, without the earmarks, there's $5 million in there. And we're likely going to add close to another $1 million.
Okay.
And so, even though we might make some of these land purchases, we've kind of settled on having like a 3% of our general fund in that. We don't want to amass, 7 or 8 million. I mean, that's not prudent in my mind, but, so I think some of that's gonna kind of balance out.
And what's like the smallest amount we should have in the, interlocal agreement as like that emergency money? Like, what would be the least you would be comfortable having in there?
Well, it's like your savings account, so
Yeah.
how much are you comfortable having in your savings account?
You know, I'm going to interrupt here for just a second because we have a lot of stuff on our agenda left for tonight.
Okay.
I would like to see the finance committee have this detailed conversation and maybe bring forward a couple different options. Just
Yeah.
to honor everybody's time again. Does that sound
Yes.
fair?
Well, and we have talked about a lot of these balancings that
Right.
Gwen is referring to at finance. So yes, that'll easily be part of the conversation. next
Okay,
time.
great, thank you.
Sure.
So Gwen, are you ready for the?
What's next on the agenda?
The
More
monthly finance report.
Oh, goodness. Okay, so.
Oh, yeah,
where
so
did
can
I
we
go with
get
my,
back?
When am I back
Just-
on? No, just a minute, right, now you're back on.
Nope, you gotta click the stop button.
Oh, oh, okay.
Yep.
Yeah, that's going down the rabbit
There you
hole.
go.
No, that was good, that was good. Good call.
So is everything else.
I keep forgetting to turn my microphone on, so I don't know if I'm getting heard.
I know, I always think I have a loud voice,
Well,
but
as far as-
I did.
yeah.
Jason.
You're coming. Click share screen.
Oh,
That's the look on his face right now.
I don't know, Jason.
Definitely not.
Oh, Jason's sitting over there.
Well, he wants to see how confident everybody is, so he has to jump up.
Are you on, 7A budget report for May 2021?
Yeah, let's just pop it up there for a minute. We, obviously will be more interested probably in the June 30th, but everything looks good here as far as, expenditure budget authority. I think we'll get pretty close to zero in the general fund, and obviously we'll be transferring any of those funds that we can to the interlocal agreement, but the revenues look good, the expenditures look good. Let's scroll up to the high school just briefly, same thing there, though,
It's the sheet below it, Callie.
8% of the year remaining and 19% of the budget in the general fund, and it goes up from there. So that all looks good. The revenue side of things, we're collecting in the, debt service fund, 150%. That's the interesting one, and we need to look at that. But 95% of the, taxes, we'll get to our 100%. I have no concern there. And our cash funds are kind of coming in right where we thought they would come to. So I think the budget report looks good, and we'll have one for you. Kelly's giving me my 3 minutes. And, so the cash flow report just is a good, a quick report that you can look at that says, okay, what funds are in the negative? And you really, at year end, we can't, so scroll down and it'll tell us, it'll show us through May and, June 30th, we can't have any funds in the negative, so, Delia and I'll be working on making sure that, we make some movement to get all funds in the positive. I think keep scrolling.
Now, the numbers for this,
Scroll to
this
the right.
report come straight from the county print.
Actually, they come from our books after we've balanced with the county,
Oh, okay.
because sometimes the county will put money in the wrong fund and that sort of thing, and we don't want to deal. We
Right.
use our own numbers until they catch up with us and get it cleared up. So, but that's an easy report for trustees to look at and, you know, what funds are actually in the negative cash. And that'll, you know, wave the red flag. Nothing here that we can't fix, with maybe the exception of the health insurance. Yeah. So that's what's up next, is the health insurance financial. And remember, we had some conversation about stop-loss reimbursement, $750,000 that was going to be coming in, that was going to fix our deficit. Today, we got word that the stop loss money is on the way, and we also got word that now we need to pay the bills. And so there's gonna be zero impact on that cash negative. And for those of you that were in the room, when I talked to Scott Hawes about it, my question was, for that stop loss reimbursement, have we already paid the bills? And he said, yes, and today we found out that no, in fact, we haven't. So, yeah, that, I was dumbfounded when I got the email from First Choice that said, you need to make sure you have money in there to cover that $750,000 worth of bills that are coming your way.
So when you said yes, were you a little taken aback, like, oh, that's awesome?
Yeah, oh, I was excited. We were cheering. We're like, we're gonna get to zero. And then, and I called Scott, and he said he would call them, and then he didn't call me back. Actually, Tracy called him because I couldn't talk. So, so that, our news on the health insurance is not gonna be what we thought it was gonna be. So we are gonna be using, at least a transfer overnight, and then next year we're gonna be working on making up that shortfall. So that's not good news. The next report is, food service, and the food service looks really good.
You gotta scroll back up for
Yeah.
food service.
Keep coming down.
I passed it one time,
Yeah,
I did a flyover.
so, right,
No, Gwen did the flyover, you wanted to catch up.
oh, I went to health insurance and you went to food service, sorry. So, bottom right-hand corner, just up a touch, shows a balance of $320,000, and so that is awesome. I mean, it's been touch and go a few times, we were in the negative, but, we ended up in quite good shape, so.
And this will be complete for the end
Yeah.
of the 2021,
This is May, so we'd have some June costs in here. So we'll look at it again in June, but I expect that it'll look equally as good.
And any idea how the summer program is going yet, or is it too early?
Well, we won't see any numbers for the summer program for a while, but Jan, I think things are going great. She has good workers, and she had plenty of workers, which was a little bit of a concern, whether or not we'd have people that we needed. And, no, things are going great, and they are serving a lot of kids, so. So I think that's the financial report.
Okay, any other questions? No? Good, let's move on.
Here, I'll help you by turning off your mic.
3 minutes.
Yeah, I only
okay.
gave you 3 minutes again.
Okay, thank you, Gwen. And I know that gets to be kind of a tedious conversation, but it is one of our most important responsibilities. So, we have to keep tabs on it. Thank you. I'm glad you keep good tabs on that. Next item of business is human resources and personnel. Tracy, you're up, and this is an action item.
Well, this is stipend, or no, this is just your monthly review of your employee movement.
Does anybody have any questions?
So I'll just make a motion to approve the, personnel items as presented.
Thank you, Scott. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we, accept the personnel action items. Do we have to do a roll call vote?
No.
Let's do just a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes unanimously. Stipend roster.
Yeah, so annually, we bring forward our stipend rosters for the 21-22 season. You'll see the detailed report shows all of the positions that are filled, and then we also listed the vacant positions that we still haven't filled. So you would just move forward to accept this if you wish. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Questions?
I did have a comment. Excuse me. Just, you know, a number of years ago, we decided to have 2 high schools. And that does mean, to me, fully committing to all of our extracurriculars at both high schools. And, just I think in the future, we should consider upping the high school stipends so that everyone can do everything. Things like, a musical at each high school each year, you know, we kind of, when we split our high schools, went 1 year here, 1 year there. Things like the science club that we okayed last year at one school, you know, think about encouraging it at the other. I think it would be good to make sure that we have equal opportunities at all our schools.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll make the motion.
Okay,
Then
thank
that
you,
too.
Ursula.
I move to approve the renewal of stipend employees as presented.
And I'll second that.
Great, thank you, Ursula and Kim. All in favor?
Aye.
Say aye. Sorry. Any opposed? Okay, motion passed unanimously. Recruit and retention plan for substitutes.
Yeah, and I only have a quick 45-minute presentation on this, so just a little bit.
No, we're not going there.
Start the timer. Yeah. So we have presented this both in the in the Personnel Committee and the Finance Committee. This is just bringing forward the same bonus program and structure that we had for this last year that was so successful into next year's as well. So the financial implications for the 2021 school year, those numbers are gonna probably have a little bit a different ratio because we have true semesters for this coming year because we didn't have to match the spending of the bonus program to the CRF funds. And so it's gonna be actually a true semester, so they may look different, but I'm assuming it will probably be in around the same amount again this coming year. So any questions on this?
Tracy, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So, this makes us more competitive, in getting, talent from the other districts. Have you heard anything from the other districts, about this program?
So we did have a couple of comments of saying, you know, that the bigger school was able to have more flexibility, but we did have some other schools that actually increased their rate. So, and we have talked about increasing our base rate versus the bonus program, and we truly feel that the bonus program is more effective, because even though we probably have smaller sub-pools, we have people that are working more, and they actually call up Bree and say, okay, how many days do I have until I get to that next tier of that bonus program? So it's been really effective. So, and the other schools do have the funding as well, so they would have that flexibility. But yeah, we did hear a little bit.
A tidbit for everybody, the 15 people covered almost 22% of the sub jobs.
Wow.
And the one that subbed the most had 161 sub jobs.
I think we have 180 days,
Wow.
so it's pretty amazing.
The next one was 148, 139, 138.
Jack, the person who did the 160 days, how much did they get from this program?
Oh, that I don't know.
We'd have to break that out in terms of,
A guesstimate, maybe?
it's basically $10 a day. I mean, big picture. Well, no, that's in addition to their daily rate. Oh, yeah.
I'm thinking, how much
But he's
is,
saying from this program. Oh, so it was.
would be the
$10.
1,600? Okay.
It, depending on the 2 semesters and all that, but that gives you kind of the big picture.
So probably $1,460?
$1,600, yeah, they got extra.
It's a nice bonus.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
For
Okay, any other questions, Rebecca?
So Tracy, as I understand, we implemented this, bonus due to COVID and the extra dangers the subs were taking on in the classrooms, you know, way back last September, October, whenever we did this. And the reason to continue it, even though it's no longer a COVID concern, is that it's been effective or why should we continue it considering what? The reason we started it is over.
Sure, so there's a couple of reasons. First of all, we're not too sure what the impacts of COVID are gonna be. So we wanna make sure that we have a healthy sub pool. And secondly, our local market, our Flathead Valley market, is in dire shortage of employees. And so whenever you have a very low unemployment rate, that directly impacts your sub pool. And so we have to keep our sub pool competitive as well, otherwise we won't have any subs to cover our positions. And so this helps us to stay, you know, somewhat competitive. So,
Actually, one last piece of that, so we also at the same time, I believe, let people take their vacation time as cash instead to keep them. Are we gonna see a big glut of people, oh my gosh, I have 60 days I haven't used that, or is it all dealt with?
Because we cast out their leave, and so they will be just having their average leave banks that they have in a normal year.
So next year
So
should be
they're not
more.
gonna have any excess that was carried over.
We're not gonna need more subs,
So I'll cash out.
Jack?
So, you may, when you first asked the question, you said the dangers of COVID. The bonus was not because of the dangers of COVID. The bonus was because we weren't getting people to be subs. So, and that we implemented two things, the bonus system and then, the paying out of comp time. So now they're gonna be able to, take comp time, but you gotta still have subs. And so we've got still the anticipation of a low sub pool, because we don't know how many people are gonna wanna come back. So the bonus was never because of the dangers of COVID. It was
Part of
strictly-
it though was because we did have a lot of subs that were not comfortable subbing in the schools because they were afraid of getting.
Right, but it wasn't, the people that were subbing, they were taken on no different protections than any of the other personnel in the district.
Right.
So it was more because of everybody's, the concerns of people that made the sub pool small.
And the
Okay.
possibility that we were gonna have a lot of teachers out too.
And now we're competing with higher wages. Yep. All over the place. Yep.
Sue, I'd like to make a motion to extend the sub-student incentive plan for the 21-22 school year.
Thank you, Lance. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Ursula. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thank you so much for supporting us. We really appreciate it. And that is
Okay. Next up, the 403 contribution. Micah?
Yep. So our district employs, 5 people in kind of a mid-management level position. These are people who supervise other employees, like custodial, IT staff, food service, and, transportation. And one of our concerns that we've been talking about for some time is, how do we recruit, retain, these valuable employees to our district? They have incredible skill sets and knowledge, and should they leave, we would be hurting, trying to replace them. We did some market adjustments, with salaries and did some comparisons, and, one, idea or suggestion that I had was to, also include them in a 403B contribution, which is basically another retirement, incentive or, alternative retirement plan. School districts and hospitals are the only, entities that can legally, do a 403B. Currently, the administrative teams, at, Kalispell Public Schools have those contributions, and, I see this as a long-term, incentive and benefit for those employees if they stick around. That is something that it will build on. Treating these employees similar to what we've done with other administrators that we've brought in, we were looking at a 1%, contribution of their base salary, and you can see their names and their date of hire. So, you know, if you look at, like, Jason Heacock, he's been in our district since 2006, been a very, loyal, long-term employee. And so would like to ask the board to approve a 403B contribution at 1% this year, and then it would increase by 0.5% each year, capped at 8.5% like the rest of the administrative team.
Any questions for Micah? Anybody comfortable making the motion?
the financial implication for next year would be $3,611.
I'd like to
I'll
make a
move that the
motion.
board of trustees approve a 1% of base salary employer contribution to a 403B for the food service supervisor, database administrator, network administrator, custodial supervisor, and transportation supervisor beginning the 2021-2022 school year, with a 0.5% increase each year thereafter and capped at 8.5%.
Thank you, Will, that's a, yeah, that's a
Who wrote that?
mouthful, yeah. Is there a second, Lance?
I'd second that.
Okay, thank you. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor of the 403B contribution, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passed unanimously. I just want to make one comment. I know it seems like I'm kind of buzzing through these action items, but we have no members of the public out here for public comment, so I'm not going through that move at the time.
And they've all been reviewed at committee level as well.
Pardon?
And they've all been reviewed at the committee level as well.
Right, yeah, thank you. Okay, next one, webmaster, sub-temp pay schedule. Gwen?
Yeah, so once a year, we approve our, sub-temp pay schedule, so that when we use, temporary employees, we know exactly what we're gonna pay them. And so attached to this, if you scroll up a little bit, Kelly, are all a variety of those, temporary workers and substitutes. And those that are highlighted are the ones that will be changing. Many of them are tied to the collective bargaining agreement, so when there's an increase in collective bargaining agreements, it's tied directly to this temp, like this curriculum work, long-term, sub, and those types of positions are tied to the CBA. And the one that and of course, we need to increase to follow the minimum wage, that went up in January. And then the one that we're actually increasing from, what it's been in the past, that was straight up an hourly rate, maybe scroll up a little bit, Kelly, is the summer grounds workers. We've been paying $12 an hour, and again, we're competing with, everyone else is paying $15. So we bumped that up $1. You might see this again during the year if it seems like we can't get, temp workers for these rates. But if we did a wholesale increase on this, then it would force our sub rate to go up, and pretty soon we're talking about, $250,000. So we're kind of trying to manage it as we go through and increase those where needed. So this is, you're approving the entire schedule that will take us into the next school year. It has the wrong date at the top, but that has been corrected, for the one that we're sharing out after adoption this evening. So if you're willing to, approve those, that would be awesome.
Questions?
I move that we, approve the 21-22. Oh, I can't see it now, dang it. Sub-temp pay schedule.
Second. Been moved.
Callie's trusting your recall.
Not a good bet.
Been moved and seconded. All in favor of updating the substitute temporary wage schedule? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passed unanimously. Webmaster placement on the IT schedule. Gwen?
So last spring, when we actually a year ago in August, we created a salary schedule for the IT people who are paid by the hour. And Wes Hines is our webmaster. We probably should have added him to that schedule at that time, but Wes, was a teacher for us, and he retired, and then he came on as our webmaster. He was on Social Security, he could only earn a certain amount of money. So he would work for us 16 hours a week for whatever that amount of money that he could earn was. And so now he has gone past that restriction, and so it seems appropriate to actually put him on the schedule and pay him for the work he's doing. So that's, and I'm asking two things here, and you can do either or both, but I think it's appropriate to correct his wage for the 2021 school year and then place him on the schedule for the 21-22. If you're willing to do that. Wes doesn't know that we're asking this of you, so don't feel like, you know, you have to do this because, the word's out, but, I think it's appropriate because he works really hard for us. His expertise is much needed, and we rely on him heavily for our website. And we're talking, I think the catch-up pay for this year is somewhere in the neighborhood of $800 or something. So,
Just say if we had to go on the regular market for somebody to do
Yeah.
this.
yeah, so this is minimal, but it seems appropriate to place him on the schedule.
Okay, any other questions? Is there a motion?
Sue, I'll make the motion to approve placement of webmaster on the IT hourly wage schedule, lane 2, step 6 for fiscal year 21, and lane 2, step 7 for fiscal year 21 for the person, and lane 2, step 7 for fiscal year 22.
Thank you, Kim.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Ursula. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor to approve this placement as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passed unanimously.
And these are me again, I guess. There's a transportation request, and he's not with us tonight, and nor is Greg. Where are those people at? Where are Greg? Oh, Greg's not there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Been there the whole time.
Do you wanna take that?
I was just gonna make the motion to just
Okay.
approve this because it's already been through the transportation committee at the county level.
No, it hasn't.
So this one hasn't?
None of them have, but they will go there next.
We didn't talk about, Jack, was that, it needs to go, in July 14th, I think.
Oh, it goes before the
So
transportation?
this is the one with Big Fork.
Oh, okay.
This is the agreement with Big Fork, and then there's another one that has to go to the county or whatever.
I jumped the gun.
Yeah, so.
If I can approve both though, I move to approve
No, one's elementary, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wait, we're not done with questions yet. I have a comment on this, because I was really confused with it. I read interlocal agreement, and I think it's where we put all our savings. Yeah. Is there any chance we could call it something else?
We could probably call it a memorandum of agreement, but technically it's agreement between two government agencies,
Yeah.
and those are called interlocal agreements. That's
Yeah.
what our interlocal agreement fund is too.
Yeah.
An agreement between two agencies, elementary and high school.
Yeah.
But I agree, I read that,
Sorry.
and that was my first
Yeah,
thought.
yeah, I was very,
and I wasn't confused at all.
Of course not, Jack.
Interlocal agreement funds, because I understand the concept and
Yeah.
what they're dealing with.
yeah, I just,
I wasn't confused, because we only have.
okay, well, we'll figure it out. Diane and I know now what it
Okay,
means,
yes.
okay? So, is there a motion? Jack?
To approve the interlocal agreement
Yes.
between Kalispell and Big Fork?
Yes. Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Will. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor of approving the interlocal agreement with Big Fork? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Motion passed unanimously. Bus routes. Gwen?
Those are the bus routes for next year.
Move to approve the 21-22 bus routes as presented.
I'll second it.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in
Is
favor?
there further discussion?
Aye. Is there further discussion? No.
Well, I could read them to you and explain every one of them if you'd like.
That's not.
No, I just have a little.
Okay,
We
what's
talked
your
about
question?
having activities being important, you know, in our board goal vision, and I have, you know, would always like to see at some point considering, putting in a second bus route for activities, an activities bus, especially for KMS, which is highly inaccessible, and the students can't drive yet. So, just in the thoughts for years from now, we're saying we're focusing on activities, to me, that's one of the fundamental ways to let them do it, have access.
You cannot do that in the transportation fund. You cannot transport children to extracurricular activities using transportation dollars. That would need to be a general fund expenditure or some other fund, but that would never hit this radar,
That doesn't get,
Rebecca.
okay, no, thank you.
Yeah, this is for transporting children to and from school only. So it's very scripted, in the law, what you can do with the dollars.
Right.
Consequently, the budget amount is very
For practices.
Yeah.
restricted.
So like Candace on Wednesdays, I think, has an after-school, I'm not sure if it's co-curricular, but a time for tutoring and stuff with teachers in the school building. Is that, so would picking them up, rather than picking them up at 3:30 when school ends, picking them up at 5 for a co-curricular tutoring with teachers, is that, I'm just curious.
Well, you might be able to do that, but we're talking about, I don't know, 40-some bus routes that take kids all these different directions, and now you're talking about taking, I mean, those middle school students could go anywhere from the south end to the north end. This would be something that would be
Yeah,
a very expensive proposition
that's
to.
not starting a discussion for next year.
Yeah.
We have a full year to look at community partners for it, or,
But it would be
Yeah.
only for that tutoring piece,
Maybe you can-
never for an activity.
You're already kind of doing it, right?
and even a co-curricular activity, like
Add it to your Uber.
band or theater,
Oh my
which are
God.
okay.
Rebecca, did you hear Scott's suggestion?
No.
Diane's gonna do it.
That's what she does.
Okay.
Okay, come on.
We're all bald over here.
Is there a did we have a motion?
You got a motion?
We had a motion and a second.
I think we can vote.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Contracts and change orders. Gwen?
Okay, the HEART program MOU, and that's an agreement between the HEART program and Kalispell Public Schools, because the HEART program is in one of our buildings, and they are applying for and in line for a HUD grant. And in order for us to be awarded the grant, we need to have an MOU in place that says, this is what the Heart Locker is gonna do, and this is what Kalispell Public Schools is going to do. There's a match requirement, which is also covered in this MOU. So, and that document is attached. So we'd like to see that approved tonight, because we actually sent it to them today.
Okay, questions?
A little bit.
There's also the
Yes, and the
property
second
evaluation.
piece is,
That's the FHS activity, field in order to kind of continue the work that, Morrison and Merrily is doing and helping us with, whether or not it's a viable piece of property, which we kind of determined. We had a meeting with the, county, flood administration and the city, department as well. But it's basically just a project directive so they can continue to do it. It's about $5,000, for that. And I basically already spent $2,000 of it.
and signed it on 6/14.
Okay. Then I move we approve those contracts.
I'll second
Thank
it.
you, Ursula. Thank you, Will. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion, any opposed? Motion passed unanimously. Consent agenda.
I move we approve that too.
Thank you, Ursula. Is there a second?
And it's
Second.
elementary only.
Oh, you're right. Elementary only,
That's
so
me. We did it,
you.
we did it, yeah.
Okay, moved and seconded, elementary trustees only. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. The next consent agenda, oh, well, no, that is the whole thing. That is all. Safe return to school and continuity of service plan.
This is a item that will be a standing item on every one of our board meetings from now until I've retired.
I thought
We missed one.
No, we didn't do the high school consent.
There's that out of.
Okay,
Oh.
Yeah, I knew I was supposed to do that.
We have a
Sorry.
district-wide
Sorry.
consensus.
Okay, so the,
Probably back up just a little bit to the high school.
Well, maybe all the elementary trustees should recognize they passed 2 listed consent agenda items there.
That was all.
Yeah, but the high school folks didn't vote on it.
Well, no, there was the tuition, and then there was the purchases over 10,000 for the elementary, and then there's purchases over 10,000, or no, then there's out-of-state, country travel
Okay.
requests for the high school
so let's go back to the second
consent.
elementary for,
Elementary was done. Ursula.
But
but there's another one.
I specifically moved to pass the elementary
Right.
consent
And
agenda.
Diane
That's-
seconded it. And that was
Yeah.
voted.
Well, that's what I wanted to make sure the elementary people
Yep, I
recognize
was,
that
that
there
was,
were
oh, that was
two
my motion for sure.
elementary consent agenda items, not just one.
Got it?
Yes.
Okay, then there's a district-wide consent agenda. Is there a motion?
I move, go to Indiana, okay, I move to okay the consent agenda as presented.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you, Heather.
Wait, is that our first?
That's the first
No.
one.
When we do that.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passed unanimously. Now, safe return to school and continuity of service plan.
Yep, standing agenda item for,
No, wait a minute now, did the high school, did all the trustees recognize you were approving 2 consent agendas for the high
Yes,
school?
they did.
Hey, just making sure.
But then there's a district-wide purchase.
Yeah, that's what I'm referring to. The second one, that's a consent agenda item also for purchases over $10,000. So likewise, the elementary, where they recognized and they were doing 2 of them, and for the high school, they recognized and they're doing 2 of them.
Yes.
And district-wide, there's 3.
There's 3?
Fundraisers, travel, and purchases.
What the heck's going on?
I know,
So-
right?
We passed them.
Well, no,
if you're doing the high school consent agenda, anything in that consent agenda is passed with 1 motion.
Yeah.
And, well, passed
So
with
we-
1 vote.
So we've got the elementary, the tuition and purchases over 10,000. We've got the district-wide fundraisers, travel requests, and purchases over 10,000.
But there is only a fundraiser, there's a label, but there's no actual fundraiser to be approved.
Oh, true.
It got sent back at,
Right.
finance because of some
Exactly.
dates with it.
So it's coming back next month.
Okay. So we're good.
Yes. You're
Okay.
As far as the minutes go.
All right. This will always be a standing agenda item. We have to review it at a minimum of quarterly. So we passed this at the June 8th board meeting. So it will be, if we make any changes as we go through the summer and we have to do any kind of updates, we get any new interim guidance, with regards to COVID, or any policies, we will bring this forward, and it will just be an ongoing opportunity for the public to have input, and for the board to approve any of those changes. So that was all. Basically, information only.
Okay, good. I have one last thing, because Lance reminded me that I get the last word. And I wanted it to be positive. And this was something that kind of got people in the central office and myself pretty excited. In thinking about our strategic planning and our retreats moving forward, our plans, and you heard Micah and Matt and Callie talk about, we have to figure out what's important, our core and our non-core, the things that will always stay the same, the things that we are willing to change. And if you look at a gyroscope, that is exactly what this does. This will keep us, a gyroscope keeps a ship, a vehicle on track, on course. The outer part of it stays the same, never changes. The inner side is spinning all the time. That's why it keeps it balanced and keeps you going in the right direction. So this year, with all the exciting things we get to do, we need to stay focused on what is important, what things we're willing to change, and then we are this little string here that, when pulled, it puts everything in motion and keeps us all balanced and going in the right direction. So I brought this gyroscope today because this is going to be a traveling gyroscope this year. At our board meetings, I want this to get passed amongst us trustees, or something that we see a trustee do or say to keep us on track on what is important. And I have thought about this, who's going to start it? Who am I going to give this to? And I thought, you know, we've come through a really, really tough year, and we've learned a lot. But there was a person who kept us going in the right direction throughout all of this. I mean, our goal was to have in-person school, in-person instruction. And the one person, the one trustee that kept us going in that direction is Lance.
Thank you, sir.
So Lance is the first recipient of the gyroscope.
Do I get to play with it?
You get to play with it.
All right, thank you.
And then you can pass that on next time,
All right.
okay? Is there a motion to adjourn? We have no public comment.
I move to adjourn the meeting.
Second?
I second.
Thank you, Heather. Moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned.
Yay.
So for everyone, the history of meetings is adjourning a meeting?
I know.
Hopefully not.